Okay, I will be very brief today, and good day to you all. The meeting, this meeting is of course, as we said in our invitation, at a very critical moment because of the first deadline, the early July, on the reciprocal tariff. And also another deadline to come early August, the review of the U.S. participation in international organizations. I mean, U.S. as the very biggest member of the WTO and the traditional leader, whatever happens with them is heavily impacting the WTO and the system. We know a little bit about what is happening around the reciprocal tariff, but we don't know what to come with this review of its participation in international organizations, including in the WTO. So that's the purpose for this meeting. I will stop here to give floor immediately to Mercedes, who kindly agrees to moderate this session. And let's go ahead, Mercedes. Thank you.
Thank you, Lou. Yeah, this is an issue that is going on and probably will be going on in the near future, in which we have all this uncertainty. But we have the pleasure to have three persons that are very well known in the area: Wendy Cutler, Petros, which I don't see him anymore, Petros Mavroidis, and Tim Groser. The three of them, they have long-standing participation in negotiations in WTO and also bilateral trade. So I met him in the bilateral negotiations of my country and also in APEC and things like that, the same with Wendy. So we got each other to be in touch many times, looking for free trade as a way to improve our relationships, but not only that, also to improve the ability of our people to get out of poverty. So this new era of changes in trade policy without taking in consideration WTO is making us afraid, because a world without rules and with clarity probably will make a lot of damage to the economy. I will ask my presentators to start soon. They will do very short starting presentations, initial presentations of 7-8 minutes each. So we can have like rounds of conversation after that. If you agree, that will make the participation of all of you open, and also, of course, opinions here are very open, taking care that we keep the Chatham House rules that we have here in FMG. So the first one that will talk to us is Wendy, from her own experience and her knowledge of US. Wendy, please.
Well, thank you so much, Mercedes. It's really my pleasure and honor to be on such a distinguished panel with so many former colleagues that I have just so much respect for and have learned so much from through the years. I thought I would just use my time to basically give kind of my overview to where things stand right now with respect to U.S. trade talks and what are the implications for the WTO going forward as a result of these negotiations. When Liberation Day was launched, we heard that the U.S. thought it could achieve 90 agreements in 90 days. To no surprise, this has not materialized. As you know, everyone in this webinar understands more than anyone, trade negotiations are complex, they're difficult, they're detailed, they take time. And the notion that not only are you going to try and do these within 90 days, but then also do them with multiple partners is really a huge and daunting task. And as a result, we've seen the administration kind of back off some of their deadlines and back off kind of the contents of these agreements, now calling them framework agreements. 2 agreements have been concluded to date, one with the UK and one with Vietnam. Although with respect to Vietnam, we have not seen the text, and my understanding is that some of the details are still being ironed out. But What can we learn from both of these deals? And I'm sure all of our trading partners are combing not only the UK text, but for any information coming out of all different negotiations that are underway. First, there is agreement on a baseline tariff. And for the UK basically bought into a 10% tariff. And Vietnam apparently has agreed to a 20% tariff with another tariff of 40% for quote unquote transshipped goods. Second, there were in the UK deal some upfront commitments with respect to tariff cutting, which is done on a non-MFN basis for the US and for the UK. And our understanding is, based on President Trump's announcement, that Vietnam has agreed to eliminate all of their tariffs just for the US as part of this deal. And importantly, these agreements show that the US is contemplating follow-up negotiations. These are framework deals. At the same time, the negotiations are going on. Letters have been sent to, I believe, 25 trading partners, if my counting is correct, threatening tariffs from 20 to 50% if no deal is reached by the new deadline, August 1. And negotiations are continuing. Now, our trading partners are really confronted with a lot of tough decisions as they embark and seek to conclude these talks. And the first question for them is, are these agreements even worth the paper they're written on, given that many new tariffs seem to be addressed, and the sectoral tariffs under Section 232 seem to be off the table, at least for many partners. And so, you know, our trading partners really need to have that, you know, really decide whether they're better off with these agreements that bring down reciprocal tariffs, but do not shield them 100% from future tariff hikes. Second, a number of countries are very concerned with what other partners are getting. So everyone's looking at what everyone else is doing, and no one wants to be in the position where they bring home a weaker deal than their trading partner. Third, there's concerns about China's response to these deals. In particular, China has issued a warning to our trading partners and to the US that if these deals result in provisions that run against Chinese interests, that they plan to retaliate. And finally, there are WTO concerns here, and this is what I kind of want to highlight for the webinar this morning. And that is, by agreeing to these deals with the United States, we're basically asking our trading partners to accept the violation by the US of its commitments on bound tariffs, but we're also asking our trading partners to put aside the MFN commitment and lower their tariffs just for the United States. This concern is out there. My view, but I'd be interested in others' views, it doesn't seem to be as paramount as some of the other concerns that I've mentioned, but it clearly has serious implications for the WTO going forward at a time when the WTO is just facing so many challenges with respect to kind of all aspects of its work. There may, I would just note, when we see the final texts of some of these deals, there may be other concerns with respect to WTO violations or infractions, including with respect to non-discrimination and transparency and maybe other provisions, but we just don't know that yet. Maybe I'll conclude by just saying that a lot can happen over the next 2 weeks. And just in short, things to watch will be, are there more letters? Are there more deals between now and August 1? What happens to the Section 232 tariffs? Will any be imposed beyond copper, autos, auto parts, steel, and aluminum by August 1. And I would note just yesterday, the US launched 2 new Section 232 investigations, adding now to the 6 or 7 that are underway, depending on if you think copper is concluded, because many of the deals on the copper 232 are not available yet. We'd also need to take seriously that if deals are not reached, that certain countries may choose to retaliate against the United States. And the EU here, while it has put off some immediate retaliation, it is working very hard on a package that could surface soon after August 1. And finally, I would just put on people's radar screen that with respect to China, we have a different deadline, that is August 12th. And here, I suspect that we will roll over the tariff truce that we reached with China, in particular, as there is more and more talk in Washington about a possible summit between Presidents Xi and Trump, with an upcoming visit by Secretary Bessent, Lutnick, and Greer to China, possibly in the coming weeks, to help lay the groundwork for such a summit meeting. So I know I went a little beyond my 7 to 8 minutes, but I hope that's okay. Back to you, Mercedes.
Mercedes, you're muted, Mercedes.
Thank you, Wendy. Very interesting information, a lot of good insights. And of course, I think Petros can complement with the view of what is going on in WTO.
Whoops. Okay. So what's going on in the WTO? Just a second. So, Wendy, it is as if we wrote this thing together, you and me. I'll have a hard time persuading people we didn't speak in detail before. But I mean, you'll be surprised how similar our views are. Something is happening here. I don't know why this doesn't work. Okay. Now, what's my argument? Well, I think, not disagree. I totally agree with every word. I could say I agree with Wendy and stop it here, quite frankly. I mean, the only element I will add to what Wendy said is what I see in inconsistencies. On the one hand, we talk about reform in the WTO, and on the other hand, we do those deals. Reform is necessary for a couple of reasons I'll mention in a moment, but I cannot see how we can do reform and the deals at the same time. To me, this is a zero-sum game. We just postpone the reform for God knows when, and by postponing reform, I think we eviscerate the relevance of a WTO. So I don't need to debate the first point, why reform, legislation. There are some super obvious candidates. The agreement on subsidies is totally outdated, from JVCs to safe haven to SOEs. All these things have to be discussed. It's not just look at the TPP text, which is just a few years, not even 20 years after the WTO, and you see the difference. We need to find space for economic security, which has become, we sat down with Bernard trying to understand where do we find economic security in the WTO, and quite frankly, because of case law to a large extent, there is no room for economic security. We cannot pretend we don't need economic security anymore in the WTO. And of course, we need to find a way to enforce the contract. Why do we sign agreements if we don't enforce them? I mean, the MPIA is no ersatz to AB. It might be a laudable perspective, but quite frankly, 6 years on, we have one case and a second coming now. This is not good. Now, why the deals in the reform are zero-sum in my view? As Wendy said very correctly, there are these 90 deals became 2. Maybe a couple more are coming, God knows. But for now, we have missives about high tariffs, no deals. So what do the deals have in common? One, I was expecting Bob Wolf to write a paper, because the first thing they have in common is lack of transparency. There is a great piece in the Financial Times, July 13th, about the US-Vietnam deal. We know precious little about what's going on in this agreement. We know they violate Article 2, and we know they're discriminatory, as Wendy correctly said. So they go against the heart and soul of a WTO. Now, can they be accommodated in the WTO? Quite frankly, I cannot see how you can do those things. I mean, if you want to ask for a waiver, you have to show exceptional circumstances. 1971, I disagree with the Working Party report of the GATT, quite frankly. I think the US had some very good points. But that was an exceptional circumstance. 2025 is not an exceptional circumstance. I mean, you cannot say because I run 3 trade deficits without counting services, I have to do something about it. That's the whole idea of international trade. And these are not transitional agreements. Waivers have to be transitional. These are not transitional agreements. So why they're not transitional? Well, how on earth can you say I deal with trade deficits by signing agreements the way the Trump administration does? If you want to address trade deficit, you have to use macroeconomic instruments. You have to address the consumption savings ratio. I see the president of the US going the exact opposite way. He berates Jay Powell for not reducing the rates and increasing consumption. I mean, you cannot predict the future, but quite frankly, the likelier scenario is a year or 2 from now, we need to do new deals. So we'll end up in a spiral of doing bilateral deals, non-MFN, which will be violating the previous deal, which violate the WTO, and then what's left of the WTO? And plus, there is the uncertainty that for all these reasons, we never know when the new request for a deal will come. No matter where you stand on as a trade theorist, why do we sign agreements? One thing is for sure, we sign agreements to have certainty. That's exactly what has been taken away through this policy in the last 5 months. I cannot see, quite frankly, what is the best argument to be opposed to what is happening, to be opposed to deals. This is the Trade Policy Uncertainty Index. I will add, if you can have the PowerPoint, this is very recent, goes all the way to 2025. The first months. Now, I just say one last word. I mean, when we prioritize deals over reform, every prioritization comes with a trade-off. And the deals that we do append the WTO, or at least postpone the WTO reform for a few years. So this is the choice that WTO members make to this day. Either I make a deal and WTO has less relevance, or I stand my ground, I don't make a deal, and I tell the US, come, let's look for multilateral solutions. I didn't see from the leaders outside the US any willingness to coordinate on this front. I saw a rush to bilateral deals. My last point is this. Is what we leave a parenthesis in US trade policy. First, I'm not equating Biden with Trump. But what I observe in the last years is that the US trade policy oscillates between I do nothing for the WTO, that's Obama, Biden, to I am aggressive, that's Trump 1 and much, much more Trump 2. Now, can we, when the leader is between I do nothing to I go against, count on this leader to reform the WTO? I wonder, and I leave the decision to the policymakers in the WTO, but I'm very, very worried about the future of the WTO. And I stop here.
Thank you, Petros. And now we can go to Tim that can make his comments on these 2 good presentations. Your microphone, please. Tim is right now in Chile with Alejandro.
Can you hear me now?
Right.
First of all, I should explain that I'm actually in the Ministry of Finance in Santiago, Chile, with Alejandro. But not only am I not talking on behalf of the Chilean Ministry of Finance, but I'm not even talking on behalf of the New Zealand government. This is my own view. And I wish to address a particular issue.
Tim, can you put your microphone closer to you because it's like kind of far away?
Okay, I'll start again. Sorry about the technical problem. So I'm
I'm actually in the Chilean Ministry of Finance in Santiago with Alejandro beside me, but I'm not speaking on behalf of the Chilean Ministry of Finance, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the New Zealand government, but giving my personal views. And I'm going to concentrate exclusively on the proposal that I did put on the table back 4 or 5 months ago in March, followed up with an op-ed written by the former chief negotiator for Canada, Steve, and former European Union Ambassador John Clark, who may well be on this discussion, and if so, hi from Santiago. And of course, much more importantly, has been now raised by the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and supported, as far as I understand it, quite strongly and very quickly by the German Chancellor. And that is a proposal for a meeting at ministerial level of the EU and the TPP countries, 39 of them. And that has attracted, as it should, a lot of attention, and I want to give you my personal reflections on it. First of all, it is not an attempt to, or at least in my conception of it, it is not an attempt to arrive at anything even approximating a united front against the United States. It seems to me blindingly self-evident that each country in that grouping, obviously the European Union being a customs union, will have to have a single position. But with respect to, if you like, the 13 different entities, the EU as a single, the largest single element in it, and the 12 TPP countries will have to arrange their own bilateral settlements with the United States. This proposal, in my conception of it, is nothing to do with trying to present a united position. Each country will have to find some accommodation as best it can. It will be messy. It will not sit comfortably at all with the WTO system, but it is what it is, to quote the favorite expression of my former Prime Minister when I was Minister of Trade. So it is what it is, but we must look beyond that. And what I think the purpose of this meeting is got 4 elements to it. First of all, the very fact of such a meeting would itself be a very important political signal. And while I believe it would be completely ignored by the administration, it would not be completely ignored in the longer term by a number of different elements that make up US thinking on trade policy, especially if it led to some action down the track. So its second purpose is what I recommended right from the start, is to agree on a standstill commitment. And I'm influenced heavily, of course, by my own experience as our chief negotiator in the Uruguay round. It would mirror the Uruguay round's standstill commitment. How important is this? Well, you can speculate about the dangers of creeping protectionism. My own view is that we're not in the 1930s. I think what has been very impressive is that no major country so far has followed the United States down this track and wishes to extend protectionism on the basis of what happened all those decades ago in the 1930s following the Hawley Smoot tariff increase. But nevertheless, there will be pressure to take measures to protect people's domestic markets with greater ferocity. And I think it makes perfect sense for the countries that I'm talking about as a minimum to negotiate a standstill commitment. I think that would be very, very straightforward to do. The third element, in my view, was not an important element, but I'm sure you could not have the European Union ministers represented in this room, and possibly 1 or 2 of the TPP countries who have talked about retaliation. They will want to make some type of statement. But the majority of TPP members are not going to be retaliating for obvious reasons, and I don't think that's an important element at all. For me personally, I think the most important element is some type of tour d'horizon to look at the sorts of issues that we've just been discussing here about systemic shortcomings of the WTO that have sat there on the shelf for 30 years and very, very little has been done about them. Now, I'm not suggesting that a meeting at this point should try and develop solutions, but the first step towards trying to make a common appraisal is to start to identify what are the key issues. So that, to me, is the underlying purpose of it. It is to look beyond the current situation. I do not believe for 1 minute that it will be possible to stabilize each of our relationships, trade relationships with the United States in a way that is consistent with the WTO, but it will be done because of the importance of the United States. But I think we need to realize this is just one stop in a very uncertain journey. And simply for the rest of the world, and this is an important component of the rest of the world, the 39 countries together are easily more than twice the share of world trade of the United States. I think this would make a start to a journey ahead of us to try to map out some longer term, more stable solutions, because these bilateral deals, they are not a long-term solution to anything. That's my view.
Mercedes, you're muted again. Mercedes.
Great, team. Thank you very much for opening some issues for the discussion. And I remember the meeting in which you mentioned that proposal, which is very important to have it in mind, because 39 countries, like-minded countries that can contribute with this discussion on how to really move ahead with WTO with better rules and in this uncertain situation as Petros has presented, you know, that probably won't change very soon, as he presented too. So my point of view is that really we have to work together in this issue, and countries like mine will be more than happy to participate in these meetings of CTPP to address the issue of how even improve the trade among ourselves, because I think we are not really as connected as we should do when we see the numbers of the relationship and the trade among ourselves. So I open the door and the floor, sorry, for comments of anyone. If you want to raise questions or comments, are more than welcome, and then we come back to our 3 panelists. So please raise your hand. Okay, I have first Alan and then Lou.
Yeah, first of all, I cannot think of a better panel to address this subject, and they have done good service to us today with their comments. Could not have done better. The question is how to move forward. We're about the Friends of Multilateralism. How do we preserve the system? How do we improve it? And what are the next steps beyond that? Tim Groser and his colleagues from the EU and Canada have marked out probably the most practical path possible. Cecilia has also called for this coming together of those who believe in international cooperation. The United States doesn't. I'd say one thing with respect to the United States, and that is we know that over time countries and policies change. We had world wars, and those who were our enemies became our allies. There was a time very recently when the United States and China were very close and supportive of each other, and now are not. But things change. So how do we preserve? I'd ask the panelists to think about and say whatever their thoughts are on the subject. How do we preserve the opportunity to enhance international cooperation to get back to multilateralism. And I don't think that what Tim Groser was talking about was and I view it as a way station on the way to getting back to a global system, but the only practical means to do it and the most effective means to do it, rather than an alternative. That the end of the story is 39 countries get together, see who will join them, and the rest are frozen out permanently. I doubt if that's what's in mind. So I'd like to hear more about what the path back to multilateralism is. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan. And Professor Liu?
Yeah, thank you, Mercedes, and a lot of thanks to the panel for the excellent presentation. I have a single question, probably to Wendy and also others if they want to chip in. We have talked a lot about what is happening and what may happen with this reciprocal tariff and all the bilaterals. How about the next month's deadline of the US review of their participation in various organizations? I mean, here in Geneva, we heard that the ambassador will be coming in September. So that's interpreted by many as a signal that the US will continue to stay and probably will engage. But the question here is that if things continue like they are today, would that, be it US stay or leaves, would that change much? And also at the same time, the WTO ambassadors here with the Norwegian ambassadors facilitated are also discussing on the way forward on WTO reform and so on and so forth. So reading his kind of report to members, what I heard from some ambassadors is that the way ahead is not going to be easy, quite bumpy, with a lot of things that where WTO is not functioning well, like on dispute settlement, like on non-market economy, and many other things, aspects, which means that these are very difficult to tackle. And so I just want to understand from Wendy and the other panelists about their thoughts on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Lou. Now we have Edwini Kizi, Director of WTO Agriculture and Commodity Divisions, raising his hand.
Thank you very much. I just have a simple question for the panelists. I think there is a view currently circulating among WTO members that if we were to succeed in reforming, whatever reform means, then we may be able to get the US back. I wanted to find out from the panelists if they think that if there were to be a successful reform, do you think that the current US administration would then get rid of everything, abide by its MFN obligations? Do you think that is feasible? Or even if there were to be genuine WTO reform, do you think it would actually move the current administration to really abide by its WTO commitments?
Thank you, Edwini. Now we have Jonathan Pratt.
Let me echo Alan in thanking our panelists for their thoughtfulness and being provocative enough to draw out important questions. And let me simply add to the list of questions to tease out a little more elaboration. And I look forward to hearing from Cecilia and others. Number one, look, any caucus always runs the risk of criticism of exclusivity and exclusion. It was one of the reasons that the Ottawa Group was formed, of middle powers who otherwise don't necessarily have a natural home, nor are they primary, for the most part, primary protagonists. Here, the EU and CPTPP combination excludes some players, important players, who will have something to say about prospects for regrouping, and who are engaged either adversarially or cooperatively with the United States at the same time. Think of Brazil, think of India, And Wendy, you didn't mention China as one of the deals. We don't know what's in that framework either. So I'd welcome how Tim and others you see building out from this, especially given the other things that are unfolding in the fall. At the working level, I think you'll still have a G20 trade discussion, at least at the senior officials level. You have APEC ministers responsible for trade, each of which would be contributing a similar discussion, I would expect. So it's all in terms of the question, simply to draw out some further views. Thanks.
Thank you, Jonathan. Then next is Bernard.
Thanks, Mercedes. So you already have a long list of questions, so it's going to be quite challenging to deal with all of them. But piggybacking a bit on what Jonathan just said, so if we go for the EU CPTPP as the core of a group of countries that have, committed to liberalizing trade, having a rules-based system, and so forth, so where does China fit into that strategy, right? Because if you think about what is going on, insofar as anybody can figure out what is going on with respect to the US, you have this whole trade deficit dimension, which seems to be very peculiar to Mr. Trump. But then we also have, on top of, if you read the text of the UK agreement, et cetera, there's this specific dimension of, and if you trade with China, I'm going to treat you doubly, doubly as bad. So I think what that raises is the question, if we're thinking about this EU CPT type of nascent core of a group of countries, is it makes sense to think about, okay, bringing China in earlier in terms of dealing with specific issues that everybody knows need to be addressed with, and that really ties into then potentially into WTO reform. But I agree with Petros, this is really far down the road. Or is it better to keep China out, which was really the strategy that was pursued in the past, right? So what do we learn from previous attempts? And again, how does China fit into this? Thanks.
Thank you, Bernard. And two more. There will be William and then Cecilia. So William.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you for the opportunity to participate. I'm sorry that I'm underdressed for the occasion, but I'll do my best. It's been a really interesting panel. Let me respond to one point made and then make a suggestion. I think Alan is right that things change, and the United States policy, as well as other countries' policies, are likely to change in the future. I don't think they're likely to change very much in the near term. The president's got fixed views on trade. He's held them for 40 years. He's not going to change. The bond market may force him to not do as many things as he wants, but I think his fundamental attitude is not going to change. And his lack of interest in multilateral institutions of all sorts is not going to change. That doesn't mean that he doesn't find them useful on occasion, but fundamentally, he's a unilateralist. He believes in the power of U.S. Strength and his infinite ability to bend everybody else to his will. He's going to see reversals, but it's a waste of time, I think, to try to get a fundamental change of view. What I would suggest instead is, first, I think recognizing that at least for the time being, MFN is dead. And it's not just dead because of Trump. It's been dying for a long time. It's been very increasingly difficult in the WTO to reach large multilateral agreements of consequence. You've got a number of countries that simply are objecting. The WTO itself is moving in the direction of plurilaterals, joint statement initiatives. That's not a bad thing. But it's Plan B compared to, I think, what we would all prefer. But that's where we are. If you think about it in that sense, that MFN is bad, not dead, or at least on life support, then I think the question is, what do you do instead? And there, I think the United States has sent a very clear message to everybody, which is that we're not, for the time being, a reliable partner, period. And the obvious conclusion to that is find other partners. And to me, the interesting thing is that everybody else is doing that. And I think we ought to recognize that. We've written about it on, you can see it on our website, commentary on our website about other countries finding other partners. The EU has been aggressive on that. Southeast Asian nations in particular are doing that. There's a Turkey UAE agreement being negotiated. Canada has reached out. There's a lot of this going on, and it's going on a surprisingly conventional way, which is market access, market trade liberalization, the way things have been done for 30 years. And I think the answer for the rest of us is to, the rest of you really have to exclude the United States, is to continue to do that without us. And don't do it on an MFM basis. Do it on a basis that includes the participants and excludes the United States. I think that's the only way to go forward, at least for the time being. Eventually, I think we come to our senses and change our policy, but that's some years off, and I don't think it's worth waiting for. It's important for everybody else to move forward.
Cecilia, thank you, William.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. Very interesting panel. I also do not think that reforming the WTO on a short-term basis will bring the Trump administration back. They fundamentally dislike the system, and unless we go back to the old GATT days, I don't think they will come running. But just about the EU and the CPTPP, I think there are maybe some misunderstandings, and also maybe because the president of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, was a little bit unclear in her statement. It is not about creating an alternative WTO. It's about a rapprochement between EU and friends and allies in the CPTPP, maybe seeing if there could be, I mean, ideally at the end, a big free trade agreement between all of these countries, but a way to share ideas, to see if there could be some sort of umbrella agreement, if there could be some ways of participating in the rule and standard setting, and working with CPTPP countries and others to bring forward some multilateral agreements that are already in the WTO with other countries that are willing as well, just to break a little bit the non-action in the WTO. So not an alternative to WTO, but a way to bring things forward in a more smaller plurilateral context, but not excluding any other countries in this regard. Some things might be done between the EU and the in the CPTPP, maybe in rules of origin or something that could be done to facilitate trade between the two blocks. But in the rulemaking in general, it would not be to create. And I think maybe she slipped a little bit there, Ursula von der Leyen, because he created quite a riot in Geneva, I know, but that was not the intention, to create an alternative WTO. It's a way to get things moving. And I think it's a path to be tested. And if other countries want to join, fantastic. Whether it's, I mean, the main thing that is done in the WTO spirit, and that it builds on some of the plurilateral attempts. The more acute ones would be the greening of trade and maybe something on subsidies. And I think with that, and I spoke to Dr. Groser about that, and she does not see any, competing difficulties there. In the contrary, that could actually facilitate some breaking some deadlocks.
Thank you, Cecilia. So there are many questions going on. I will add probably the participation of BRICS, because they are really important also. I think we have to think about them. They are moving together in many aspects, investment, and besides trade, they're moving in other areas like investment. So I think we should start looking at what's going on there. So I leave the floor again to our panelists and also to Tim, that I know he has to leave in a few minutes, so I'll probably give Tim the possibility to speak first. Yeah, your microphone, that's the thing.
Well, thank you very much. I apologize for delays. This is not my technology, but the Chilean Ministry of Finance I think there's a lot of wisdom in the comments we've just heard on this issue. I mean, to start with Alan's point, he sees this as a way station. That is precisely how I see this proposal, but I don't want to define the final destination at this point. I think what Cecilia said is close to the reality we are dealing with. That, I mean, first of all, if there were such a meeting, we have to understand this is potentially the start of a very long-term process that would, because of its complexity, find expression over a period of years. And potentially, as Cecilia has outlined, a variety of different solution sets, some of which may well fit very comfortably into existing WTO agreements, and others may require some creative thinking in different directions. But I think what is most important, this would be my number one point, is don't try and answer these issues at the outset. Live with some constructive ambiguity. Start the process of a journey without the final destination fully defined. That is my strong personal view.
Thank you. Then I will go to Petros this time. The reverse way. Your microphone, please.
I'll be very, very brief. And because at the end of the day, it's what Alan said, his very first comment, where do we go from here? So in my view, and that's a 12-digit proposal, very, very specific. In my view, the dispute settlement of a WTO is an anomaly. In what sense? This is the only regime where we have compulsory third-party adjudication. So one way to get out from the current dead end is maybe if we all accepted a regime like the International Court of Justice. Those who want to continue in the WTO, original WTO, go ahead, sign the optional clause, and those who want to stay out, stay out. And then we can have tomorrow a regime to adjudicate disputes. When it comes to legislation, I'll say just one thing. I'm very sensitive to the point made about G20 by Jonathan Fried. I would see the EU CPTPP as something like the OECD for the WTO, the antechamber to coordinate policies, but then move and discuss them in the context of G20. We cannot pretend that we'll do a world trade order without listening to China, India, and so on. We cannot leave out 3 billion people and say that's the new. No, we can coordinate ourselves, but then take it to the G20 and see how far we can go.
Mercedes, you were muted. Mercedes.
I'm sorry, Wendy. I'm just asking Wendy to take the floor.
Okay, well, I've listened to what everyone said very carefully, and I'm going to try and at least respond to some of the questions. But I really want to thank Bill and Alan, and in particular, they may want to weigh in on some of my responses as well. First, I just need to take issue with two things that Petros said. Number one, I think he went as far to say is that the U.S. Under the Obama and Biden administrations, and even Trump 1, were not engaged in the WTO. I just take issue with that. I served under Obama's second term as a deputy to Mike Froman, and we were very active in the WTO then. And I think this gets to my second point, and that is that I think the U.S. for many years has been pushing for reforms in the WTO, but these most reform efforts have not gained a lot of traction. And so I just think it's inevitable that our current strategy would need to go hand in hand with reform efforts. Maybe from an ideological point of view, the two don't make sense to proceed simultaneously, but that's the way of the world. And if indeed, I think it'd be great if the WTO members were now to kind of figure out that reform is urgently needed and really step up efforts. I totally agree with Bill that this doesn't mean the Trump administration is going to change its views on the WTO, but a WTO with a lively reform effort with results is going to look a lot more attractive to all parties, including eventually the United States. With respect to, Tim's suggestion, I was a TPP negotiator. It was a very important agreement. It was, quite regrettable that the U.S. was never able to become part of this agreement. But I do take pride in that when you look at the USMCA, that about 70% of it is lifted and actually improved from the TPP. But I was heartened by Tim's comment that the purpose of this meeting is not to kind of be anti-US or expect that the US overnight then is going to see this meeting and kind of change its positions and, rethink everything. I don't think that will happen, and I'm glad that is not an objective because, like Bill said, countries, in this current environment with the US where it is on trade policy, they have their own decisions to make and their own, routes to follow, and people should do what's in their interest and not necessarily wait for us. Lou had asked about the U.S. review. There are kind of two reviews going on now. I'm not sure which one you were pointing to. There is a periodic review in the U.S. Congress of U.S. continued participation in the WTO. This is the year that could come up. Not hearing a lot about it. I think there was a resolution introduced, but I'm not exactly sure of where that stands. But no one is, I think the good news is no one's talking about it. It's very low profile, and I think it's in everyone's interest that it remains that way. The other review that's going on is the U.S. review of dues to international organizations, and this includes the WTO. And just preparing for this webinar, I did see last night that the results of this review are supposed to be finalized and wrapped up by early August. So we'll see what transpires there. In terms of some other just points raised that I'd like to just respond to. I mean, one point that didn't come up, and I really expect Petros to raise it, given his provocative piece about kicking the U.S. out of the World Trade Organization. That has not come up, but let me just address that head on. I mean, my view is everyone be careful what you wish for, because in many ways, this could be music to our president's ears. And I'm reminded of his TV show many years ago, The Apprentice. And in that show, he had that famous line to contestants, "You're fired." In this situation, I think that if it looked like we were going to be fired or expelled, we would quit first. So, I think people really need to think that through, whether that is really in the WTO's interest, and where that would leave the WTO. And frankly, if you're thinking of kicking out the United States, I could also think of a few other members that, probably qualify as well. So I think with that, let me see if there were any other comments. Well, there was a comment that if there was really true reform in the WTO, would that change the U.S. position and kind of, would Trump back off a lot of his current trade initiatives? I think the answer is no. But again, it depends what reform means. It means different things to different people. There's incremental reform. Someone mentioned, I think Petros mentioned, the need to rewrite the subsidies rules. So there's all types of reform that's on the table. And frankly, I think the best thing WTO members can do is accelerate their reform efforts during this period when the U.S. is trying to, dramatically change the international trading environment.
Wendy, do you want to add 30 seconds on U.S.-China, the deal or non-deal?
Yeah, so I purposely do not call this a deal. To me, it's a trade truce, and I'm not giving the current administration credit for reaching an agreement with China. It's really a trade truce. And as part of that trade truce, a 90-day period was established to have further discussions and address issues of concern, right? Not just the issues of the tit for tat that was in place. And that's what the Geneva deal did. It undid the tit for tat tariffs and non-tariff measure counter retaliation. The question for me is, what could we achieve with China going forward? I know there are some in the administration that, including our Secretary Bessent, has talked about kind of a structural reset negotiation with China. I'm very skeptical personally that that would lead anywhere with any discernible results. But we also have a president who is, I think, looks fondly to his visit to China during Trump 1.0. I think he loved the big purchases announcements. Many of these did not come to fruition. So I think we do need to be prepared for a US president that may want to try and strive to do the deal with China that others could not do. But again, I'm skeptical, and my view is that given where we are with China, we should have kind of, let's just say, modest objectives and try and build confidence and trust over time by dealing with some pressing issues, but trying to take it all on in once in some mega deal. I just don't see how that materializes in a way that is going to have a meaningful impact and really change fundamentally our competition with China.
Thank you, Wendy. And we have more questions on the floor. So I will ask Patrick to raise his questions and comments.
Thanks, Mercedes. Just a very quick question, more for information than anything, Wendy. I completely agree that the attitude of the United States towards the WTO has been in a downward spiral. But was it not President Obama who first blocked the appellate body appointments, which sort of would suggest, if that's true, would suggest that already then there were some kind of fairly important issues?
And I can just respond quickly. You're absolutely correct. But again, in my view, just because we took that move, it doesn't mean that we then disengage from all aspects of the WTO. And at the same time that we were doing that, the way I recall it, we were, actively negotiating many plurilateral agreements and pushing for other major reforms.
Great, thank you. So now for William, the floor.
I agree with, on the last point, I agree with Wendy, the appellate body issue goes back a long way. And I think it goes back even before Obama. People in the United States have complained about elements of it almost from the time it was negotiated. And the Biden administration didn't do anything to help the situation. So there's plenty of blame to go around on that particular issue. I wanted to add something about China. And respond to India, something Wendy said. I'm in a different category. When I talk about the agreements, I say there are three, and include the China agreement. I mean, it's hard to tell because there's no text, and so there may never be a text. You never know. But based on what has been said and what has apparently happened afterwards, there was, at least for the time being, an agreement on tariffs. And there appear to have been two sets of mutual concessions, basically industrial magnets for students and rare earths for export controls. And you can see that playing out in even yesterday in decisions the United States has been made that have appear to honor the terms of that agreement. Going forward on China, and I think this is not just a US issue, it's a global issue, but for the US administration, I see them schizophrenic on this subject, and Wendy alluded to this. The president appointed a number of people that are basically decouplers who view China as an existential threat. And they continue, I think, to argue inside the administration for moving in that direction. The president himself, I think, oscillates between believing that and at the same time believing that he can sit down with Xi Jinping and make some kind of giant deal that will solve all our problems. I don't think anybody but the president believes that, but that motivates a lot of our policy. He has been, I think, restrained in some of his public comments compared to what he said about some other world leaders. And I think holds out the hope that there will be a sit down with Xi, which I think there will be ultimately, and that they can work out some of these problems one-on-one. As I said, that's unrealistic, but that creates the schizophrenia in our policy. On the one hand, he wants a deal and he doesn't want to shut the door to making one. On the other hand, he's driven by strong concerns amongst others in his administration to maintain what he regards as U.S. technological leadership. So there we are.
Thank you, William. And then we have Alan.
Hi. I wanted to underline a couple of things that were said most recently by Wendy. It's possible to move forward on two tracks. It's possible to have the Groser and Clark and Verheul initiative, CPP, TPP, and EU coming together. Cecilia has spoken about that as well, and actually do something in the WTO. And we're headed towards a meeting in Cameroon that should be, probably would be, a repeat of the meeting in Abu Dhabi, which I was enthusiastic that it didn't end in just total nothingness, but it came close to nothingness, and we'll go to close to nothingness again in Cameroon. Where's the leadership? I applauded the formation of the Ottawa Group, but it was remarkably timid. The EU says all the right things about multilateralism and then comes forward with about nothing in terms of substantive, really important substantive initiatives. The China says multilateralism is, the most important thing it could possibly be, but it comes forward with nothing. So where's the Jean Monnet? Where's the Lee Kuan Yew? Where's anybody that you can point to who stands up? It could be the UK if they found themselves. They, got rid of 27 others, and now they're free to come forward and say something. They have a voice. They were the partner of the United States in the founding of the organization. We don't have the leadership. I think I have a lot of respect for Ngozi, but she will tell you what the limits are of her job, and no one tells her what actually defines her job in a maximalist fashion, as the president of the World Bank or the managing director of the IMF. They're expected to get up and say, here's a proposal. I think I have a strong belief that Tim Groser, were he a minister or were he at the WTO, he would say, well, we can do both. We can have CPTPP and we can have the EU coming together. And by the way, we can actually accomplish something in the WTO. And I know there are 166 countries. You're all over the lot. The U.S. has already told the EU, told the WTO, forget about it. We don't want any reform. Why would you want reform? The hell with the U.S., as has been expressed in more gentle terms in this session. Go forward and do something also at the WTO. Make the attempt. A modest agreement on investment, put it into effect, investment facilitation for development, just do it. and say, okay, someone wants to complain about it, go sit in another room and complain. We're meeting in room D on Tuesday afternoons at 3 o'clock. We're just doing it. Anyway, I look forward to leadership, and we haven't found it.
Thank you, Alan. And now we have Alejandro and Tim, that they have their hand raised.
Okay, a few comments because I've got to go to a meeting in the ministry here. First of all, just so people know where I'm coming from, I'm always been a strong pro-American, and that's not going to change. So the idea of doing this and telling the United States to put up or shut up to me is absurd. I'm also reminded of a comment some very astute person made apropos of President Trump, that on many of the important issues, Trump is the wrong answer to the right question. I think we need to start addressing some fundamental issues. I don't think we can do this at this point in the WTO, but very consistent with Alan's final last comment, nor should we rule out the possibility that some solutions to some problems could quite easily find their way over time into the WTO framework. There may be other solution sets that require some other novel solutions. In any event, none of this is a final resting point. When these deals have been done by the United States, largely enforced on the other countries, we are not living in a stable equilibrium, ladies and gentlemen. So we need to understand that. This is a new situation, and I don't think it can be resolved just by returning to the past formulae that we've used for 30 years in the WTO. So I'm just suggesting a process amongst a group of countries that whatever their differences are on individual issues, are strongly committed towards a legal-based system and towards structural solutions backed by dispute settlement processes, as any legal agreement has to be. And I think we could start a discussion without having to define the exact final point of rest. That's my overall view. Thank you. I have to now use myself.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you very much for your presence. So we have any other comment coming in? Some extra questions? Do we have some of our other participants send questions to us?
No, I don't see any questions in the chat or the Q&A. No.
Yeah, the other issues I would like to ask you is the issues of the sectoral tariffs, because I think these are disruption even for the competitiveness of the US, copper, for example, or, well, the latest one was a tomato issue with Mexico, and some people in Mexico complaining about that. What about that difficulties that they may have with these issues of sectoral tariffs that are raising, particularly in industries that are supposed to be using these materials like copper or iron or things like that?
Maybe I'll start and just say that the president also has been very aggressive in his use of Section 232. And again, just overnight, new investigations were launched on drones and polysilicon. The copper, as you mentioned, Mercedes, findings were announced with a 50% tariff, but still a lot of questions on the scope. And apparently those details have not been published. But I think you make an excellent point that for some of these products, they're important inputs into final products, and they have all different types of impacts, not only on our trading partners, but also, frankly, on the US economy as well. When I look back on the use of Section 232 during my career, this statute was really used very judiciously, and it didn't always result in tariffs, at least the way I recall. That is not the only remedy that is instructed under this trade statute. And so there are many other measures that could be taken, including ways to increase U.S. competitiveness in these sectors. But I'll be the first to admit that right now, in many of the negotiations that are bogged down between the U.S. and individual trading partners, they have a lot to do with the treatment of the Section 232 tariffs. For countries like Japan and Korea, in many respects, these sectoral tariffs, particularly on autos and steel, are much more important to them than the overall reciprocal tariff. And it's interesting because with the UK, there was discussion of 232s. There was an accommodation reached with a tariff rate quota on autos in response to the auto 232, and some expression of some kind of favorable consideration for pending pharmaceutical 232 outcome. When the other countries, depending on whom they are and whom they're negotiating with at what time, they're getting different messages on the 232s, whether these are really on the table or they're not on the table. And that is just causing a lot of consternation. And as more 232s are announced, particularly during this 3-week period, which is now 2 weeks before August 1, I think that's just highlighting the uncertainty and really leading partners to question the value of these agreements, because if you make a lot of concessions, including like a Vietnam supposedly eliminating all of its tariffs for the United States just to get relief from the reciprocal tariff, and then you're hit with semiconductor and wood and other tariffs in the future, that really undermines the values of these deals. So I think this is going to be an extremely important aspect of these negotiations to watch going forward. And in some cases, and I believe with Japan, it could just lead to no agreement come August 1.
William.
Thanks. Just 3 quick points. Just a newsflash. Even while we were meeting 15 minutes ago, Trump announced an agreement with Indonesia. And provided no details. So we'll see later, maybe, what that means. If there's someone from Indonesia on this conference call, maybe they can elaborate, but it was news to me. The second thing, just to comment on the Mexican case, that actually is an example, I think, of the system working normally and working in a WTO consistent manner. That's a long-standing anti-dumping case, and what the president, wasn't the president, what the Secretary of Commerce did in that case. I mean, I think it was the wrong decision, but it was a decision that was consistent with U.S. law, and I think it was a decision that was consistent with WTO rules regarding dumping. So we'll see how it plays out in the end, but I don't think it's an example of where there are many examples of the president riding roughshod over the international trading system. That's not one of them. That's one where they followed the rules. You've got a obstreperous group of tomato growers in Florida that want protection, and they're using the law, attempting to use the law to their advantage. It turns out actually to be more controversial in the United States because there's a lot of other vegetable growers elsewhere in the country that think this is a bad idea. So it'll play out in our domestic politics. Finally, I just comment on Wendy made a very important point on the 232 cases. They are more important for a lot of countries, I think, than dealing with the April 2nd tariffs. And they're profoundly concerning because the United States basically is telling everyone else, not only do we want these deals to be based on to address the April 2nd threats, but we will not commit to not moving the goalposts in the future. In other words, the United States wants to retain the ability to come in later with some of these other things and assess new tariffs beyond after these agreements are struck. And I think that's one of the things that's been holding up all these agreements. The countries are reluctant to agree to something if they don't know that what they're getting is going to stick, and that what they're getting is going to actually be the deal. And the United States is not going to come back for another bite 3 weeks later. But that is what we're doing. And I think that's one of the things that's complicating the landscape on this whole thing.
Thank you, William. And then Hamid.
Thank you so much. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. A lot of interesting points. Some I agree with, some I don't agree with. But I'm not going to get into what I think. But what I want to highlight here is, first of all, the first problem that we're facing now within this current situation, in my view, is what Alan referred to, which is the leadership vacuum. This is the biggest issue that the system is facing. We got for decades used to the US hegemonic leadership, which is gone, but we have not replaced this with any kind of leadership, which cannot be hegemonic like the US, but will have to be more coalition-based. And of course, this would be more complicated to put together, but even that would need a convener, which we have not found yet. So that's point number one. I have a question here because we're reading the reality of what's happening in the US, and definitely we got very, very valuable insights. My question is, am I correct to conclude that the US, as a current policy mindset, does not want to be constrained by any rules going forward? Wendy was absolutely right when she referred to whether trading partners consider that the agreements written now or signed are worth the paper they're written on. Because I think the biggest casualty in this situation is the predictability and stability of the system. I mean, the biggest problem now is the uncertainty, and this is why we have the system in the first place. It's not about liberalization. Actually, over the past 30 years, we've really sucked at opening markets. But the real value of the system is certainty. So am I correct to conclude that the US no longer wants to be bound by rules? Point number one. Point number two, am I also correct to conclude that the US does not want to be subject to binding dispute settlement of any kind at the multilaterals? Now, the reason why I'm asking those two questions is that the answers will have implications for the way forward. And I don't agree with Petros's conclusion that we cannot do the bilaterals and the reform at the same time. I think maybe we need to look at it slightly differently and separate the two conversations. There's a firefighting conversation that is taking place about how we face the US and the uncertainties. And then there is another conversation about how do we shape up the WTO. And by the way, the WTO needs reform with or without the US views. In other words, of course, I do not imagine anything that would constitute an act of hostility towards the US. Nobody wants the US out. But at the same time, I think it would be a big mistake to wait for the US to say what they want so that we start a proper conversation about WTO reform. But anyway, my two questions, am I right on these two conclusions regarding the US? Back to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think we go back to our panelists, Petros, Wendy.
Well, the first
Petros.
question,
Okay.
let's just say we're moving in the US from dependency on a rules-based system to a very transactional approach. And we all know that. And you can see this in the agreements that we're forging right now, right? They're not going to read like other trade agreements that we're familiar with. They're going to be much more transactional, talking about specific things without a lot of language on, thou shall do this, thou shall not do that. But does that mean that we're not interested or no longer, accept the rules? I wouldn't go that far. Maybe I'd say, we have views on these current rules, and some of them we think are just outdated and work against us, like MFN. But there are other rules that I think we continue to follow and will continue to follow, including transparency. Although now someone's going to come and say, but where are the trade deals? We haven't seen them yet. My view is because, again, like Vietnam is not concluded yet, and so there's no text to share yet. But anyway, that's neither there, nor there. I'm actually going to defer to Alan or to Bill on your second question on binding dispute settlement. I have my own views, but I don't know if I'm really the right one to respond to that.
I don't think the current administration is interested in binding dispute settlement. I think they're interested in doing whatever they want and being able to get away with it.
It's going to be very hard to get the U.S. back to binding dispute settlement. A very, very, very big issue in the Uruguay round was whether we'd accept binding dispute settlement. The big issue at the time was U.S. unilateralism, one of the big issues at the Uruguay round. And the solution was binding dispute settlement. And Dole and Moynihan, two senators, got Clinton to agree to having a review of adverse decisions at the WTO by a domestic panel of judges. And Lighthizer put in this provision. If there were three adverse decisions that these panel of retired judges found were improperly against the United States, then the U.S. was out of the WTO, which was nonsense and wouldn't have happened. But the fact there was a congressional override or action of some sort. Historically, the U.S. is not a member of the International Court of Justice. Historically, it's a very big, hard issue for the United States on the matter of sovereignty and to have binding dispute settlement. We ought to be in it. We should do it. It'll be very politically very difficult to get there. One comment while I have the floor is Bill Reinsch said MFN is dead. I'd say it's badly wounded, or it's at least changed. But the EU, and if it joins with CPTPP, is not about to say, among all the other countries of the world, we're going to do what Trump did and have different tariffs for everyone. What they might do is say, if we have an agreement among ourselves on something or other, you have to pay up in order to join, which is not MFN, but it won't be haphazard discrimination. So I think MFN will survive, but it will be somewhat different in new agreements going forward. It'll be plurilaterals, like the government procurement code, some that will require reciprocity.
Patrick, please.
Yeah, for what it's worth, which is, I'm sure, almost or definitely nothing, just to say that as far as the appellate body is concerned, I have considerable sympathy for why the United States behaved the way they did with respect to the appellate body, for what was going on there. And I guess the fallout from that is continued resistance more generally to the idea of having adjudicated dispute settlement outside of a national context. What I don't understand that Wendy said is that that somehow MFN is antithetical to US interests if it's properly observed. Just a question, I don't know.
It's interesting when I look back on my career, one of the early the earliest USTRs I worked for was Mickey Cantor. And at that point, when he didn't know a lot about trade, right? He came in, but turned out to be one of the best U.S. trade representatives in my view, including, you know, bringing home NAFTA and the Uruguay round. But he asked us, like, as a group, like, can you explain MFN to me? Because he did not understand this principle, and based on his experience in life and in policy, this just didn't seem to make sense. That how do you get the benefits if you haven't, you know, paid the costs? So for me, I just think it was only a matter of time from a U.S. perspective before MFN would be seriously questioned. And look, we think there are a lot of free riders in the system. And we, you know, our view is right now under Trump that bilateral negotiations are the way to go, that you make a deal with countries that are willing to make concessions, and you give them, you assign them different tariff rates than those that are not. And so again, I think MFN had a time and place in the global trading system, but I'm also of the view that, you know, those days are pretty, numbered in my view, and that going forward, you know, following an approach like Alan was talking about makes a lot more sense. If you're going to get the benefits, then you need to pay up.
But how much does the United States care about Uganda's contribution?
Okay, well, I don't think you're really looking for an answer.
Anyway, this is another story. I shall shut up now.
Yeah, the thing is that when you have an agreement and you're in zero tariff at that point that we are in, for example, in the case of Peru, and then you have suddenly a raise of tariff, what do you want us to pay? You know, what are you asking us to pay? You know, that's the thing, you know.
Well,
And
Mercedes, I would even say it's worse than that from one of our FTA partners' perspectives, because in my view, our FTA partners are being almost penalized in this 90-day process. And that's because they've already eliminated their tariffs. So unlike in India or in Indonesia or Vietnam, they don't have those tariff concessions to make that, you know, would be welcomed by the Trump administration. You're already at zero, so by definition, you have less to offer. And this doesn't even mention the fact that we're blatantly violating our obligations towards our FTA partners by raising tariffs. So I sense your frustration, and I have to say I agree with it as someone who negotiated some of these FTAs, and we gave our word to other countries, and, you know, a lot of concessions were made, particularly in areas that were politically sensitive for a lot of our FTA partners, including Peru. So I would hope that somewhere in this process that there will be a wake-up call to someone in the White House that maybe we should be treating our FTA partners better than others right now.
Thank you very much for all our panelists and all the members that were participating so good. And this was a fantastic conversation. This is an ongoing conversation about uncertainty, trust, and how we build a new environment to protect trade for our people, for sure. So I go back to you, Professor Liu.
Thank you, Mercedes. I mean, this is a very rich discussion on a very complicated situation, and we don't have much time. There are many things that we probably need more further discussion and reflection. And for example, what Patrick and Wendy have discussed about MFN, and also with you on the FTA and non-FTA partners. I mean, here in Geneva, people also discuss, even with non-FTA WTO members who probably have higher tariff, more than zero towards the US, what I heard from Ambassador is simply that this is also, how to say, kind of compromise during workaround when those countries agree to have trips and service and many other things there. And so that tariff doesn't come out of air. So there was a history behind it. So I mean, but I don't want to drag on with that discussion, but I think that there are many things we need to discuss in the future. And this is probably the very moment we need to stay focused and following the situation, and also on what happens after August. And also we have MC14 coming, and it's going to be quite a complicated situation on the way ahead. So with that, I thank you for all your participation, and very soon we are going to have probably our last session with the OECD report on the supply chain resilience review, and later this month, I think it's next week. And after that, we'll be entering into our annual board and the General Assembly meeting and some break. And then we will see each other probably in September, and hopefully with better news. So thanks to you all. See you soon. Yeah.